Producing the Heart of Neon vid was a great reason to play some modern Llamasoft games for grabbing footage, which got me wondering about doing a quick dive into them as a little bit of a companion piece. Because while I've covered plenty of the classic games they've put out over the years, I felt it's been harder to justify looking at those modern ones here on the channel. So while it might be an unpopular idea for an episode, I feel it's the perfect time to do just that. Take a look at most of the modern Llamasoft catalogue. I say most because mainly so I can focus on those that you can play today, even if that means excluding the iOS ones, if only because they've been delisted for oh so long and they're not really compatible with modern devices. So grab a nice cup of tea, get ready for some frenetic zapping, beasties, and lots of colour. If any one modern Llamasoft game could be described as peak Llamasoft, then it absolutely, positively is Space Giraffe. On the surface, you might think it channels the spirit of the Llamasoft takes of Tempest et al., but to truly master this one, you've got to throw all that knowledge and all those expectations out the window and become one with the giraffe. Sure, you earn points here by blasting enemies on the web, but the real thrill comes from maximising what you earn, which really requires some patience because you've got to wait for enemies to reach your side of the web. Then you can ram them all off and earn those sick point combos. Now, that's simplifying some of the other mechanics which are in play too, but this is kind of a surface look, not a doctorate in space giraffeology. Space Giraffe's always had a bit of a divisive reputation though, and that's coming from the need to see through the background visual effects to get a read on what's going on as you play. Being able to process all that visual stimulus while keeping your ears open for particular sounds, as everything has a unique sound here, is important in knowing what hazards are your greatest threat at any given time. For some, that might just be a bit too far into sensory overload, but if you can get to that moment where it all clicks and you can track it all, it truly becomes quite special. It is worth noting that the later PC release, which is what I grabbed footage from here, does have an alternate mode with less intense backgrounds, and I'll admit, that helped me really understand the game a bit better before going for runs with the full, intense visualizer effects going on. Now this reliance on the intensity, more so than other Llamasoft games, is why I feel it's quite divisive. And it isn't helped that it requires a bit more to understand it when playing compared to other games. But Space Giraffe is such an experience that I feel it's one which is worth getting over those hurdles and trying to understand it and get to grips with it. If only because you really need to be able to appreciate how far it goes to reach that level of overload, that kind of intensity, that it does something. I feel that it's something that not many games strive for, using it as a technical mechanic, and it really stands out for me because of that. Gridrunner Revolution stakes a claim to being the only modern Llamasoft game which is only available on PC. And that's a giant shame in my book, because it's one which truly stands out today, especially today amongst twin-stick arena shooters, though it doesn't control like one. Its core is, of course, similar to its predecessors. You control a little ship, and you have to clear out each stage by taking out the enemies, which are made up of multiple segments. Pretty much run-of-the-mill for Gridrunner. Where things start getting interesting, though, is with the presence of the sun. It slowly moves around the stage on its own patterns, and you can't die from colliding, thankfully. But it will launch barrages at you every so often, and those can take you out. It is vulnerable to your attacks, and when you blast with enough shots, it'll collapse into a black hole, and that arcs your shots around the screen, letting you score some mega points as they fly about in patterns as you use them to destroy enemies. Your firing rate can be increased by collecting sheepies that occasionally drop from the top of the playfield. Sheepies are also handy if you're destroyed, as should one spawn while your wreckage is falling off the screen after being destroyed, and you collect it, you'll respawn and not lose a life. Gridrunner Revolution happens to offer a lot, not just in its whopping number of levels to play through, but also with its ship selection. While you work your way through them as you lose lives, you're also free to select them at any point. So, if the super Gridrunner ship that you start with doesn't take your fancy, you can go back to the original one instead. Or maybe blast abstract critters with the gem Busy Bee, or even the Liberator amongst others. There's quite a few on offer and it's such a cool little thing to mess around with. Gridrunner Revolution may be an intense blast, but it's one that won't leave you frustrated once the game over hits. It's also a bit special in that, being PC native, it's best played with your mouse over a gamepad, as you can whip about your ship around with ease, and honestly, using the left and right mouse buttons to rotate it feels a little more convenient, a little easier than using your thumbstick. It really is an intense shooter. It does a lot differently that feels quite unique amongst the crowd for that reason, and one I've had a lot of fun with. If you've been around the classic gaming space for long enough, I'm sure you've come across the legend of POLYBIUS. The urban legend, that is. The infamous arcade game which is rumoured to have been a US government secret project. That sets the groundwork for Llamasoft's take, which has you control of a little craft as you blast your way to the surface of many a level. There's a very distinct blaster vibe going on here, at least with the control of your plane, but unlike Williams' iconic arcade game, you are fixed to the surface on each stage, whether that's on a flat plane, around a tube, or inside a tunnel. Scoring here is really about keeping your speed up, which raises your multiplier, and that's done by flying through the horned gates. There are also secondary cattle that you will have to collect and blast, usually they're on podiums that you need to blast to get them, and that'll add up to your end of stage bonus. As you expect, or as you may expect, there are plenty of tricks that come into play throughout each level. There's usually a unique hook that each one offers, and getting the hang of that will let you work your way farther and farther into the game. Having to react on your toes to the trick that each level throws up really keeps you curious about what's coming next. It's always that hook to see what happens as you go on. Just like you see in earlier games, Revenge of the Mutant Camels and its wacky array of enemies to blast. If there's one thing about experiencing POLYBIUS, is that if you can handle it and you've got the hardware, you need to be experiencing it in virtual reality. Whether that's having a PlayStation 4 with the PSVR headset, which is how I've done it, hopefully I've got some footage of it here, or your compatible rig on your PC, the rush that you get when you're experiencing this game up close cannot be beat. It truly adds to the experience of being there, and when you get into the zone with it, racking up points, reacting to those challenges almost on instinct, you truly feel like some kind of legend. Now that's what more action games really need in my book. Before diving in, it's worth noting that in an ideal world, I'd have put this segment earlier. The games in this video I'm covering in release order, and I'd focus on TXK for the PlayStation Vita, but capturing one of those or its TV counterpart, the PS TV, is a bit of a pain. So we're going to focus on Tempest 4000 instead, which is a reworked version that provides closure to the ugly legal business that happened. I guess compared to the other games that I'm featuring in this video, the other modern Llamasoft games, Tempest 4000's basics are more or less pretty well known. So you know the deal basically. You control a claw-like object, you're situated at the edge of a web, enemies crawl up, and you want to blast them before you reach the lip. Destroying enemies will occasionally drop pickups, most of those give you score bonus and slowly increase your firing rate. There are some that grant some big ability upgrades. One lets you jump off the web, which you can avoid enemies when they get too close, and that's a true lifesaver. And then of course you've got the AI droid, your friend who does a great job in helping you clear the web, and can even save you when things go wrong. The kind of helper we really need more of, I'd say. Compared to its Vita counterpart, Tempest 4000 reintroduces a number of levels from the earlier games, along with bringing some of the soundtrack from Tempest 2000 along for the ride, giving you a slice of familiar joy alongside the original tracks which were part of TXK, which are also bangers if you haven't heard them. Sadly, it also takes a few minor steps back, and this is mostly around the controls. Firstly, the the between-level sequences, which on TXK were controlled using the Vita's gyro, it's just not the same using the gamepad and a thumbstick to control it. It feels like you lose something in that sequence. It doesn't quite work as well. But I also found that the main controls were just a bit too sensitive in comparison with its portable counterpart. That might just be that the input curves for the smaller thumbstick on the Vita compared to a thumbstick on a modern Xbox or PlayStation pad just don't quite match as well. But it does mean it's a little fiddlier to control, which can be a bit frustrating. Maybe I only really notice it because I've spent so much time with TXK. Maybe you won't. Maybe I'm just being silly about it. I don't know. But it's something that does kind of irritate me a bit. Though regardless of how you choose to go back to the web, Llamasoft's final take on the formula is still pretty much a prime example of how grand this series is and their reworkings are, and just how much the Llamasoft flair truly adds to it all. It's just a shame that this doesn't have VR support. They had developed it for TXK, and they tried to push Atari, but Atari didn't really want it to happen, to go ahead, and that's a damn shame. It would have been amazing to experience this in first-person VR. In the intro, I touched on the fact that Llamasoft's iOS catalog had long been delisted, and isn't really playable on modern devices. Though we're lucky that two of those games, Gridrunner and Goatup, escaped that sad fate, being bundled together here in Minotaur Arcade Volume 1. Gridrunner is the first installment which has hewn closer to its arcade origins, stripping things back quite a bit from Gridrunner Revolution to allow for a far more measured flow of chaos. The big difference here is the introduction of pickups from destroyed enemies, which can stack up, resulting in some aesthetically pleasing firepower as a joyous reward if you hold on long enough. I'm a big fan of the way Gridrunner pulls this off. For as much as I love Gridrunner Revolution's changes to the formula, it can sometimes be a little too much juggling its advancements. So having things streamlined here fits so well that you can get into the zone and rack up those points through skillful play. Goatup is a total 180-degree shift from Gridrunner. In this, you're a little mummy goat who has to climb up an endless tower. Along the way, you'll encounter lone goats to smooch, which gets you pregnant. Yeah, seriously. At this point, you need to walk over the surface platforms to eat their contents, which will slowly cause your belly to grow until a new kid pops out, which follows behind in a trail. As you are said, you find items you collect for points, while avoiding hassle-some threats like oxes and other increasingly surreal critters. Goatup may be the simpler of the two games here in Minotaur Arcade Volume 1, but it complements the Gridrunner chaos incredibly well. Once again, VR is supported here, both on PC and on PlayStation 4, and that was not as dramatic a jump when enabled compared to, say, POLYBIUS. It's still a magical enough experience compared to playing these in 2D, especially with like the curved nature of some of the levels in Gridrunner there. Going in VR really makes those a little more manageable in some ways. Boost Life has a name that might surprise you when you first hear it, at least in the sense that it might be more sedate compared to the majority of Llamasoft's output. But no, not at all, because Boost Life is as frenetic a blast as they come. You play the titular moose, tasked with zooming through each level, working your way to the end. At first glance, it feels pretty straightforward, in an almost first-like style, but it should not be a surprise to say there's more at play here. Firstly, you've got alternating surfaces, sheep in space style. You'll need to make the moose switch between layers from time to time to deal with the threats that come at you from each side of the screen. Speaking of sheep though, we get to the secondary objective in each level, and that's to find, recover, and bring all these sheepies to the exit point. You'll earn a significant bonus should you do so, meaning it's important to not die, because that'll lose the flock, and you really want the flock to be with you when you get to the end of the stage. Now, in some ways, Boost Life isn't quite as visually hectic as some of the other games I've featured so far, but that doesn't mean it's any less thrilling. It does have a smaller focus because it was a game that was intended to be the B-side of a second Minotaur arcade release, but they ended up expanding it out to making it its own thing. And honestly, I think that's the better outcome. It has a bit more character to it, a bit more challenge and a bit more thrill to it being expanded out. And I think that it makes it one worth trying out. As you'd expect, VR support is here, again on both PC and PlayStation 4, and it does contribute to making Moose-like even more thrilling. It doesn't do some of the fancier tricks that you got in some of the other games, but I feel that being the smaller title here, that works out pretty well for the best. There's plenty going on that'll make you keep frantically moosing about, enjoying your moose, and scoring as much as you can. Akka Arrh is one of those games that happens to have a bit of a legend attached to it, being cancelled after doing poorly in its location tests. But, 40 odd years later, Akka Arrh is back. Llamasoft got the opportunity to reinvent its concepts and making it stand out amongst arcade blasters of this modern era. You control a turret, and the aim on each stage is to clear out the attackers. Pretty simple, I know. But this is really where the genius of the reworking Llamasoft did comes out to play. Because rather than focusing on just taking things out as fast as you can, rapid fire expansion and blasting, there's a focus on timing and precision here, as you want to time your attacks to cause a chain of enemy destruction, and that's really where you score points from. And all this is done through the two weapons you have on offer, bombs and bullets. Your bombs are unlimited, you can use them as much as you want, but every time you fire them, your scoring combo gets reset. When you fire them out and they hit something, they'll explode, and this creates a shockwave. And that shockwave, expands, takes out enemies that are in its way. As those enemies blow up, they'll start their own shockwaves. And this is where the chaining comes in. Those shockwaves will create their own, and this will slowly ramp up your combo as more and more enemies get taken out. These enemies that are destroyed will add to your bullet count, your secondary weapon. Unlike bombs, when you fire bullets, you won't lose your combo. But you have limited bullets, so you really need to sparingly use them to keep explosions and chains going as they start winding down. They're also useful as some enemies are not affected by bombs. You have to use bullets to shoot them. But that's only the surface to Akka Arrh. If you're not quick enough in dispatching enemies, some will reach the turret, and you can sort of see it, but there is an area underneath the playfield that you're on. When this happens, you need to go down because they're going to try and steal your pods. And your pods, if they steal them all, the game ends. So you zip down there, and you'll need to focus on taking out the enemies that are trying to steal pods. You've still got your turret down there, blast them, get back up to the surface as quick as possible. Now, this duality was part of the original game, but it wasn't quite as delineated as it is here. So this increased focus of it, especially with the change of intensity in gameplay, on the surface things are a little slower as you're trying to trigger off combos, but when you go underneath, you need to be fast in dispatching enemies because you don't want them stealing your pods. It really makes Akka Arrh stand out, and it feels very fresh amongst this crowd today for me. The only real downer is that VR support here is present, but it's only available with the PlayStation 5 release of it. But I think that's a bit of a minor blemish. I wish I'd been able to justify a kit to see how it compares, but I feel like it would feel pretty special being able to have that more unique angle of the proceedings, like you'd expect. And we have another reinvention of an Atari arcade game next in iRobot, which happens to carry its own legendary status, being the first arcade game that used filled real-time 3D visuals. Llamasoft's take is not as dramatic a reworking as it was for Akka Arrh, but there's still plenty to be excited for. Like the original game, the idea in each stage is to cross over all the tiles to destroy the eye guarding the end of the stage. As you're doing this, the sections of the stage are distinct, and you need to cross over them, and you want to time your movements to avoid the wrap of the eye, because if the eye is open and you make a jump, you'll be zapped. Now, between each stage, you get to fly onto the next, blasting your way through, and this has been greatly expanded upon. The core stages are still the same ideas, just expanded out in sort of complexity, but these between stage flight sequences have a lot more to do. You need to blast everything for more points, you can get an extra life, you can do other things like that. The other big addition are the arena stages. In these stages, you have a fixed sort of arena. Your robot fires automatically, and your goal is to destroy enough enemies so that the explosions that they make cover an increasing quota of the map. It offers another slice of variety onto iRobot here, making it more than just the arcade game with a pretty face. It's expanded and challenging in quite new and unique ways. And yes, the ungame mode from the original makes an appearance, but this time you get to mess around with the light sync engine, which drives the backgrounds behind each level. It's a nice way to take a small break between runs when you crave that moment of peace before getting back on the horse for the next attempt. Which is why it's a little sad for me to say that iRobot isn't quite a smooth experience for me. Particularly because I find the controls a little fiddly. This came to a head for me when playing the stage which is a tribute to Akka Arrh, where you've got like one block paths and a lot of little squares that you need to cross while you're avoiding enemies. It's just a little fiddly to make those precise turns. You know, you really need tight controls for a sequence like this, and iRobots aren't quite tight enough, sadly. The other pain for me comes with the eye. If you've played the original iRobot, the eye, when it's safe, the eye is fully invisible, like it hides completely. In this version, the eye is partially open when it's closed, so there are times when I felt like I was ready to make a jump, but I wasn't quite there. It threw me quite a lot. It sort of got me feeling frustrated. Moments where I thought I was safe, but I wasn't. And it has the opposite effect that it should. And it doesn't help that there's a bit of a push to make you complete levels as fast as possible. There's a clock counting your progress on screen, and there is like sort of level goals to beat stages in certain time frames and things like that. So there's sort of this pressure to keep going fast, but that causes you to make mistakes, or it caused me to make mistakes. Again, I think this might just be a me thing. Your mileage might vary, and you might have a better experience than I do. Maybe it's just the way I function. As with Akka Arrh, sadly, there's only VR for the PS5 version of the game, and I feel like I really wish I could try it, because I feel some of the camera positioning doesn't quite feel right in 2D space. I feel it really needs to be played with the headset, but I could be wrong. I admit I would love to try this and Akka Arrh in VR, but resources are limiting. But yeah, iRobot is an interesting take on an arcade legend. It does some stuff that's a little different. I like the way that it's not just a straight conversion with some fancy visuals. It adds these new stages, it adds some other bits and pieces. Even if it's not quite up there because of some of the control things, but it's still one that's worth checking out. Now that's a lovely look at some lovely modern day Llamasoft. It warms my heart quite a bit to see these exist, especially knowing the challenges that are there in modern games development. On a personal front, I'm glad I made time for this video. It's been a while since I've sat down with some of these games, and it was a good excuse to carve out some time to do so, grabbing this footage here, but also from doing the Heart of Neon vid. And I had some amazing runs doing so, especially in Space Giraffe, which is a game that I understood how to play, but I didn't understand how to play. So I hope you're willing to do the same here. Grab these on PC or whatever modern systems you can, especially if you're in a position you have the gear and you can handle VR modes, because I feel they really do add an extra dimension to the proceedings. It's a shame that these kind of experiences weren't done by more developers in VR. That's sort of really, I only bought my PSVR originally to play POLYBIUS, and there hasn't been much that makes me go back. But hardware is pricey, and they've got to deal with all of that stuff. There's not much more else for me to say, really. I just want to say thank you very much for watching, and do go and enjoy some of the finest modern zapping action about. I think you won't regret it.